Hey everyone, welcome to this week's Masterclass episode. I am your host, David DeCelle with the Financial Advisors Alliance, and we are here with Jeremy Straub, who is the CEO of Coastal Wealth located down in Florida. This is guaranteed to be an action-packed episode. We're going to learn about his journey, trials and tribulations, the success that he's had, and basically be able to extrapolate some lessons along the way that you guys can go and implement and be better because of. So Jeremy, man, thanks for taking the time and welcome.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks.
Awesome. So I guess bring us back to, somewhat towards the beginning. How'd you get started off in the business? And then I'll make sure to ask some questions along the way.
Sure. Been in the industry 18 years. Out of college, I was planning on joining the Peace Corps. And my father owned a bunch of businesses, and he was very entrepreneurial. And in the back of my mind, I always wanted to own my own business. So this piece of Peace Corps or running a business, I couldn't decide on. So somebody came to me and said, the career of a financial advisor is the mind of a capitalist and the heart of a social worker. And that sold me.
Yeah.
In the financial advisor career, I started with Ameriprise Financial 18 years ago, and then worked my way through the ranks to a regional vice president running California, Arizona, and Nevada for Ameriprise. And then ultimately about 3.5 years ago, started Coastal Wealth.
Awesome. Now, so where'd you grow up? So you sound like you're out west, and now you're over on the east.
I grew up in Philadelphia, so I'm from the Northeast.
So the Super Bowl this year was good for you and bad for me.
Yeah. Yes. I felt like I drank like 5 Red Bulls for like 3 years.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
I got sick of hearing different quips about how I can learn leadership skills from the Eagles. I think I got sick of that after a while.
Yeah, I hear you. So I guess share with me so when you first got into the business, right? How'd you go about starting your book? It's funny that you started with Ameriprise. That actually was my first internship in this industry. So small world. But I guess how'd you get started? What were some of the things that if you could go back, you may be doing a little bit differently? Why don't we start there?
I joke now the way I started my business is illegal. It was cold calling.
Okay.
So it was before the do not call list. And I'd make 1,200 to 1,500 cold calls a week. From that, I'd schedule 12 appointments a week, scheduled 12, saw 4, sold 1. And back then we started right off the bat doing financial plans. So every client, I charged a fee for advice and did financial plans right away.
Awesome. And then how did you building your business, I guess, how did that change from cold calling to, I guess I can't imagine that you've done, 1,200 phone calls every week for the past 18 years. So how has that morphed and changed?
So I went cold calling, then I went to a lunch and learn program, we called it, which basically I did 3 lunches a week from anywhere from 5 to 8 people at each lunch, where I shared with them what I did. I did that for a couple of years, and ultimately moved to a referral-based business. And then later down the road, I sold my practice to get into management.
Now, so let's hit on those lunch and learns. How'd you find the people to attend those, and what sort of topics were covered? And I guess what was the conversion rate, if you will, from if there are 5 people that showed up, how many ended up becoming clients?
So it was a pretty simple strategy. We called it fish bowls. We'd put a fish bowl, a glass vase, a container in every restaurant. I would say drop your business card in, win a free lunch for you and 8 to 10 of your coworkers. You'd hope to get 75 to 100 business cards a week. You'd call, you'd schedule about 20 to 25 lunches. From that, you really only held about 5 to 8. A lot of people called, rescheduled, canceled. You'd get in front of 15 to 25 people that week during a lunch, and you'd bring on 1 to 2 clients. So you'd end up scheduling about half, see 4, sell 1, and the numbers end up being the same.
Awesome.
So 3 lunches a week of 5 to 8 people, and that would get you your financial planning client a week.
Cool. And I guess why'd you gravitate towards leadership? So getting out of the personal production and I guess multiplying that impact, what helped you gravitate towards that?
So I found I got more of a high for selling stuff for other people than selling it for myself. So if I was in an appointment with somebody in joint work, the excitement that they got from the work we did got me more excited than when I helped a client out. They weren't excited till years later for the work that we did. So it gave me a little bit more of a dopium hit right away. So that turned me on to leadership right from the beginning. And then the idea of just having more scale and scope and complexity in the business kept me interested in leadership.
It's interesting. So similar, much shorter journey, for me, but similar where, clients thank you in 20 or 30 years, whereas some of the guys and girls that I was coaching, they, thank you right away, right later on that day. And, they end up having something work right away. And it's just to your point, you kind of get a high off of that, which is pretty cool. I know that for me personally, my coaching style over just like a 5-year period, has drastically changed from when I first started coaching to where I am now. I guess, how has your leadership style changed, if it has, from when you first got into that position to where you are now?
I don't know if the leadership style has changed too much. For my definition of leadership's about development, and I feel improve myself, the better the people around me get. And what that's also allowed me to have is a genuine interest in people. And so, a lot of people talk about authentic leadership, or Ray Dalio talks about radical transparency. And I've kind of always practiced those things, and I think it's resonated well in how I've grown in leadership, and now they've come to be leadership strategies. But I don't know if it's changed much. I try to be as vulnerable and share where I'm at, and be okay sharing stories with people of how I've got over things. I think I wasn't that number one, that top 1% producer. I had to really work hard at it. And I wasn't just the always number one right off the bat. And I think I can relate people that actually, that middle of the pack group. And I think consistently just trying to be as transparent in the good and the bad of how and what I'm seeing for people to grow and develop. And I think that focus constantly on self-development and the focus on their development, and then being radically transparent in my feedback and experience to help them out.
Awesome. Yeah, I think you bring up a good point where you got to sort of take care of your development first. If you even think you're going to have a chance with developing others, it's sort of like the airplane example. You got to secure your mask, right, before helping others. So a similar message there. Now, so when a new advisor comes into your firm now, right, what are the 2 or 3 main pieces of advice that you give them in order to ensure, as best you can anyways, their success in the business?
So the first thing I tell them is their emotional intelligence or emotional competence will dictate a lot of their success. And it's normal for you to question if this career was right for you every day in your first year. Say your second year, you'll question it every other day, maybe once a week. Your third year, you'll question it once every 2 weeks, once a month. And by your fourth year, you'll probably question it every quarter. And by your fifth year, at that point, once or twice a year, you'll be thinking, "Oh man, am I really doing this here or the right place and that?" But that's a normal feeling, and your ability to then replace that feeling with a key activity is what's going to make the difference between your success. And then share them really the fact of, okay, if you can handle the ups and downs of the career, your goal all the time is to keep focusing on your key activities and not the results, and just making sure that you're following those activities. The last thing I tell them is I go, be smart enough to be dumb enough to do what you're told. And I know that sounds bad, and I hated it when somebody told me that when I first started. But most firms have a path to success. And if you're able to do exactly what they lay out, at least for the first 3 years, you'll be successful. And I think that's really hard for somebody that's intelligent or kind of loves the creative thought to just be smart enough to be dumb enough to do what you're told. Feels counterintuitive to the intelligent person. Yeah. And it's a hard thing to do early on.
So I want to make sure that people have some practical takeaways with what you're saying, because I think that there's a lot of good stuff there. But one thing you had mentioned was to be able to replace some of those feelings with key activities. Can you give us some examples of what those key activities are?
Sure. So the feeling would be, okay, you end up having an appointment at somebody's house and you get dark housed or porched or however they describe it, right? So they're not there. Do you decide that that's 3 o'clock that you're going to go home and call it a day? And just say, you know what, this is a bad day. I'm chalking it up. I'm going to get a beer, a soda, an ice cream, whatever. Or do you decide to go do something more productive? And so is it you go back to the office and make phone calls, or you decide to make it? So your key activities from my perspective is there's 6 key activities. It's to generate a lead. It's to call and schedule an appointment. It's to do an initial meeting is 3. It's case design is 4. It's present your solutions is 5. And then it's client service is 6. And so you should always be doing one of those 6 key activities. And in your first year, 80% of your time is in those first 3 key activities, which is generate a lead, set an appointment, and do initial meeting. Because everything else you can be able to delegate out, or the momentum will drive you. Those are the 3 you got to force yourself to get yourself to do.
Awesome. What are you finding that, I guess, one, like the top advisors that you have, what sets them apart from the people that may just have an average practice or may even be failing out of the business? I think a lot of times we think that these super successful men and women, have these thriving practices are like something special, so to speak. And I think there are special qualities, but I also think that they kind of just fall in love with the monotonous process of building a business. So if you could speak to that for a minute or two, I think that would be great.
Yes, I think there's a couple things said. So I think what I always love is hearing a top speaker talk or a top advisor speak, because then you realize they're just like a normal person, and you're like, oh wait, I could be him or her. But I think what I've found is if you break apart most of the top advisors, their case size isn't that much bigger than the case size of smaller advisors. It's just that they do a lot more cases and are able to fit a lot more into a day. I think it's an activity game more than anything else, and they tend to do more activity than someone that's not as successful. The other thing that I always tell my advisors is the difference between a $200,000 producer and a $400,000 or $600,000 producer typically is what they do before work and what they do after work. Somebody that's doing 150, 200 grand, they're usually coming to the office, doing the work, going home. The person that's doing 4, 5, 6, 100, $1 million, they're going to a breakfast meeting with somebody. They're part of it, sitting on a board. They have meetings in the morning. Afterwards, they're going to an event. They're going to a charity event. They're going to a dinner with a couple people that they think socially is probably a good thing for them. What they do before work and after work make the difference between the $200,000 producer and the $500,000 producer. And I've seen that just play out so many more times than you would imagine. And I think those are probably the differences. It's not a matter of that they're in front of bigger clients.
I think what, a lot of times what prevents advisors from doing those events, right? Those breakfast meetings, sitting on the board, going to, after hour events and things like that, is they expect to get a result like the next day. Like they go in there with an ask, right off the bat. And, I think that that's one of the biggest issues right now with, going out to networking events is people just being focused on themselves and not focused on giving to others, knowing that when you give enough and you put enough good stuff out there, it will come back full circle eventually if you give without expectations. So I just wanted to hit on that for a second. And then I want to go back to, you brought up activity. What do you think is a thriving, surviving, and dying level of activity? Let's talk about maybe meetings kept that you would suggest for someone in their first 5 years to really be able to get off the ground, because there's some advisors that go out and sort of whale hunt and they have, 3 meetings a week. And there's other people that, have 25 meetings a week and everyone in between. So I guess what would be your advice to those advisors who are trying to figure out, hey, what should my activity look like?
So I think it depends on the company and the products that you're with or leading with. What I mean by that is if you're focused in on life insurance, your activity is going to have to be higher because you're getting 1 sale per client. If you're focused in on asset management, you're going to have to get a higher net worth and whale hunt if you're like one of the wirehouses or something like that, because the margins are less than on the insurance side. If you're doing holistic financial planning and you're selling 5 to 7 products per household, you can pick up 1 client a week and be able to do it. So I think you got to have some context of what training program they're coming through to be able to determine those 3 levels that you talked about of what would be thriving, surviving, and dying. So I don't know if I'm in the best situation to say to a group across the industry of what numbers would be. I would honestly probably tell you to go look and see what they're saying at your firm, because that's going to be based on the way that people are building practices.
Right. And then as we start to wrap up here, how are you personally staying on your A game on a daily basis? Like, what is, if you don't mind me asking, like, what does your daily routine look like? How do you maintain your effectiveness day in and day out?
So great question. Morning, I'll try to give you a
Yeah.
little bit. So mornings, I usually spend 10 to 20 minutes meditating. I write in, I use two apps. The 5 Minute Journal, which is a gratitude app, which you go through. That kind of resets me on priorities, but it also makes me reflect a little bit about what's important, and that kind of gets me in the right mindset for the day. I'll usually work out in the morning, 3 to 5 days a week, and then I get started. The other app I use is Morning Pages, which is a journaling app, and you have to make 500 words to be able to hit your goal for that morning. And I found that's where a lot of my creative thought comes through. If I have a gap in my business or a system or process, or I'm trying to figure out how to best talk to somebody, or I'm just writing on kind of what's cool right now, and it kind of gets me feeling good. Those things set my day really well. And then usually I try to get a little bit of time with my family. If it's just taking my daughter to school, or it's just, hanging out and having like 10 minutes of breakfast with her. On that. As for self-improvement and kind of getting me to continue to grow, I'm a big fan of podcasts lately.
Yeah.
I do podcasts probably more than audiobooks. I might be 1 to 2 books a month, where I used to be 1 to 2 books a week. And the podcasts have really starting to take my self-development side.
On that note, before we go to the next part of your day, what are a couple of the podcasts that you really like?
Tim Ferriss, I've listened to every single one of Tim Ferriss's. I like how he deconstructs really successful people. I've been hitting a number of other different random podcasts. Freakonomics podcast I listen to. MF CEO, I've listened to
I love that podcast.
Yeah.
Andy Frisell is the man.
Yeah, so him. I've been a little worried about branding. I'm not worried about focusing on branding a little bit. So Gary Vee, we've been starting to listen to a little more. And then there you'll find the random ones that I think of. There's an automated advisor podcast. He's only done like or an insurance person that wants to get more in the asset management. It gives a lot of perspective on how to be able to do it. Duct tape marketing is another one that I've been listening to on a marketing side. But for the most part, Tim Ferriss is the one I listen to most.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Keep going.
And then the only other thing development-wise, if we're talking about how do I keep growing, is I always have 3 mentors. And the way that I do it is I usually do mentors for 6-month programs. And I just ask them, dude, can you mentor me for 6 months? And I find one person that's in my role, that's already in my existing role, that's successful, and I work with them and I pick their brain until I feel like I got as much out of them. I talk to somebody that's in a higher role than me at my existing company. And I say higher role, I mean, I know I run my own company, but I mean, if I have a partnership with a manufacturing company and I want to build something with the CEO of a Fortune 500 company or that, I'll ask somebody that's in a partner firm with me that I think could also help me out to mentor with me. And then I ask somebody completely not tied to the industry. It's a coach or somebody else that I can get advice. And what I do is I talk to each one monthly, and I ask all 3 of them the same exact question. And I'll come up with 3 or 4 ideas, whether it's career-based, whether it's an issue I'm dealing with or a person I'm dealing with right now. And so usually I'm saying, okay, here's one career question I have, here's one issue I'm dealing with, and here's one strategic question I'm dealing with. And I take their perspective, all 3 of them, and that helps me deal with what some of those things are that month that I need to think through. And there's some people I've had for 3-4 years, there's people I had, for 3-4 months. But I always try to have those people around to be able to keep growing and developing.
Awesome. And I guess to totally wrap us up here, just to give the audience some context, what does your business look like now as it relates to like bodies that you lead, and what's the vision over the next 5-10 years?
So we have 190 advisors in 14 locations. The vision in the next 5-10 years is not to grow as much by headcount, but really make sure the advisors are focused in on holistic advice. I always tell people we're a marketing company that does financial planning really well. We do marketing, and we have really succinct marketing strategies that utilize technology, and then integrate in being that holistic advisor that does and everybody says this, but I mean, from group benefits to property and casualty to life insurance to asset management to just straight financial guidance to make sure you don't make any financial mistakes and you actually keep doing what you're doing well.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for coming here today. I really appreciate the advice. For all those who have listened, this was a quick episode. It is something that you're going to want to go back and listen to again because it was jam-packed with some good takeaways. So take some notes, invite some advisors over here that you think could find some value in here as well. And we will see you next week. So Jeremy, thank you again.
You got it, man. Thank you.
Awesome.